Thank you. Thanks so much. So it's such a pleasure to be here today, and thank you for the kind invitation. So I'll be presenting on COVID and psoriasis, and I'll be taking you through the registry data that we have accumulated over the past 18 months during the pandemic, and discussing some of the important lessons that we've been able to learn from this data. So as we've heard already, in this session, COVID has led to major mortality and morbidity worldwide. More than 220 million cases have been diagnosed worldwide, and more than 4.5 million deaths reported. And for patients with psoriasis, so it's a common immune-mediated inflammatory disease, our patients were faced with a number of uncertainties and challenges during this pandemic. For one, and we've touched on this already, there are potentially overlapping immune pathways at play in psoriasis and in COVID, and we've heard already about type 1 interferons. It's been uncertain how this would translate into risk of infection or risk of severe outcomes. We know that multimorbidity is highly prevalent in our patient population. And this large study here on the right came out early in the pandemic and highlighted the impact of long-term health conditions on COVID-related death. So it used data from 17 million adults in the general population and found that increased age, male sex, and non-white ethnicity were risk factors of poor outcome, in addition to several long-term health conditions that we already know are more prevalent in psoriasis, such as obesity, chronic liver disease, and heart disease. It also identified rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, and psoriasis collectively as potential risk factors for COVID-related death, but the risk attributed to psoriasis alone, or indeed the treatments that we use for psoriasis, was uncertain. And then also there was the issue of indirect excess morbidity that has emerged as a key concern as the pandemic has progressed. For example, increased risks of anxiety and depression have been reported in the general population in the pandemic, and as well documented shortfalls in the care of common long-term conditions. And so our patients with psoriasis may be particularly vulnerable to indirect excess morbidity because of already prevalent mental health conditions, in addition to the need for regular follow-up for multimorbidities and immunosuppressant drug monitoring. And then, of course, importantly, is the issue of the immunosuppressants. So there's been concern and uncertainty over the impact of these medications in the context of COVID. And we know that these medications impact the immune system and are associated with higher risks of infections overall. So there was concern that immunosuppressants may adversely impact outcomes by suppressing the body's antiviral immune response, enabling uncontrolled viral replication and dissemination early in infection. And this is the bimodal sort of model that has been discussed already earlier. Because conversely, at the other end, many damaging effects of late-stage COVID are related to this hyperinflammatory host immune response. So these treatments may, in fact, have a protective effect against adverse outcomes in late-stage disease. So we sought to better understand the impact of COVID and the pandemic on people with psoriasis to address some of these unanswered questions and to inform immediate priorities for clinical care. We launched the SoProtect registry last year in March, right at the beginning of the pandemic, and it's a global registry for clinicians to report outcomes of COVID in individuals with psoriasis. Cases are submitted online via the SoProtect website, and you can report a case by clicking on the red icon there, which opens up a very simple online case report form which takes 5 to 10 minutes to complete. And please do continue to submit your cases as you see them. And then we also launched SoProtect Me. So this is a companion global registry for individuals with psoriasis to self-report their experiences of the pandemic, whether or not they've had COVID. We align the questions closely with SoProtect, but we were able to ask additional questions on patients' risk mitigating behaviours, so in particular shielding, which is this umbrella term that encompasses quarantine, distancing within the home or self-isolation. We embedded depression and anxiety validated screening tools within So Protect Me, and more recently we've updated it to include vaccination uptake questions. So this is the So Protect Me website where patients can go and to self-report, and it's now available in 9 different languages. And thanks to the fantastic support from all of our partner professional and patient organisations, and the IPC is one of our partner organisations, both So Protect and So Protect Me have truly been global efforts. We also have partner registries who are running aligned efforts in different disease populations, and this has opened up avenues for cross-disease comparisons, which we'll touch on a bit later. So this is the data that we've collected, and in So Protect, just over 1,200 clinicians have reported their cases of COVID in psoriasis in So Protect, and you can see the global spread. And then in So Protect Me, more than 4,700 people with psoriasis have completed So Protect Me, and again, there's been worldwide contributions across Europe and including in South America and North America. So onto the analyses. So this was the first paper that we published last year, looking at factors associated with adverse COVID outcomes in patients with psoriasis. And this paper looked at data from 374 cases, which were the first cases that had been submitted to So Protect by clinicians. We've since updated the analysis, and the data I'll be presenting today is from our updated data set of 1,205 patients. And I guess the first and most important thing to say is, of all of the cases reported to So Protect, more than 90% of patients fully recovered from COVID. And this is in the context of most of the patients reported to So Protect were on an immunosuppressant, so they're on a drug that affects the immune system. The vast majority were on biologics, 70%, with 17% on non-biologics. So that sort of headline is already reassuring. And then we looked at risk factors for hospitalization for COVID, and we found very much the same patterns as we have seen in the general population. So the risk factors in psoriasis are similarly male sex, older age, non-white ethnicity, and comorbidities, including hypertension, chronic liver disease, chronic lung disease, and also cardiovascular disease. And then for the question of drug-specific risk factors, so we found that hospitalization for COVID was associated with non-biologic immunosuppressants compared with biologics. So in other words, use of biologics was associated with a reduced risk of hospitalization. And this finding is also in line with data that's come out from several case series, and also global registry data in rheumatology from the Global Rheumatology Alliance, and also in IBD from the Secure IBD Registry. And in fact, we collaborated with these 2 other global registries and were able to contribute to a pooled cross-IMID analysis of just over 6,000 patients from 74 countries. And this showed that compared with TNF inhibitor monotherapy, which was the biologic that was the most frequent biologic in the registries, there was a higher odds of hospitalization or death with azathioprine or 6-MP monotherapy, or methotrexate monotherapy, and also in TNF inhibitor in combination with azathioprine, and also in the JAK inhibitors there. And as we've touched on earlier, so this is, of course, JAK inhibitor use prior to infection being associated with a worse outcome, and this may well be consistent with the known effect of this class of medications on reducing the innate immune response and type 1 interferon, leading to impaired viral clearance. So it's important when considering this registry level data to consider the limitations. And of course, these observations are not causal. and other unmeasured factors may be associated with biologics use. And in particular here, we explored risk mitigating behaviours, and I'll come to that shortly. The selection bias at play, and obviously the registry, as I mentioned, is dominated by patients taking biologics, with relatively fewer patients being reported on non-biologics. Clinicians may be more likely to report severe COVID, and there's no denominator data, so we can't ascertain the incidence of COVID in those receiving particular treatments, and there's no general population data in SoProtect, so we can't directly compare with the general population. And of course, with these studies, we're always limited by the size of the data set, which is relatively limited compared to the global scale of COVID. But we did go on to look at risk mitigating behaviours. And for this, we were able to use the SoProtect Me registry, so go straight to the patients to ask what they were doing to risk mitigate in the pandemic. And we did a pooled analysis with Core UK, which is a similar registry, which is a patient-reported registry in rheumatology. And we looked at 3,720 participants. And the analysis showed that shielding was more common in those patients receiving biologics compared to those receiving standard systemics or no systemic therapy. So greater risk mitigating behaviour among those on biologics may well be contributing to this signal of lower risk of adverse COVID outcomes that we're seeing coming out of the clinician reported data sets. And certainly risk mitigating behaviour is an unmeasured confounder in the clinician reported data. And then finally, we looked at the burden of the pandemic in people with psoriasis and just asking what happened to patient psoriasis during the pandemic. And 43% of patients reporting to SoProtect Me said that their psoriasis had got worse during the pandemic. Self-reported worsening of psoriasis was associated with anxiety or depression, and we'd embedded the GAD2 and the PHQ2 in SoProtect Me to get this data. And it seems that females are disproportionately affected by this too, as we can see from the multivariable logistic regression analysis there. 18% of patients in SoProtect Me reported non-adherence to their immunosuppressant systemic therapy. And overwhelmingly, this was due to a concern regarding complications from COVID. Non-adherence was associated with worsening psoriasis, and a positive mental health screen was more common in those reporting non-adherence compared to those who remained adherent to their treatment. So to sum up all of the findings, we've seen that the majority of patients reported to SoProtect who were taking drugs that affect the immune system fully recovered from COVID. And the data indicates that biologic monotherapy use in this cohort is associated with a reduced risk of hospitalization. We've seen similar risk factors to the general population, so older age, male sex and non-white ethnicity are associated with a greater risk of hospitalization for COVID in people with psoriasis, and comorbidities such as hypertension and chronic liver disease were more common in those who were hospitalized. Worsening psoriasis we've seen is common in the pandemic and associated with poor mental health, and non-adherence is associated with worsening psoriasis and being primarily driven, it seems, by concerns over immunosuppressant-related risks of COVID. And this in particular is an important observation because guidelines published in the pandemic, and here we can see the NPF task force guideline, do recommend continuing immunosuppression in people without COVID to maintain disease control. And these recommendations are of course based on the data emerging from registries. Similarly, the IPC also underline this through their IPC statement on COVID and psoriasis that came out last year. And the data really do underscore the importance of holistic models of care, preserving access to psychological support. We as clinicians should consider non-adherence in those with worsening disease and continue to communicate around medication-related COVID risks. so that the hope is we can help to mitigate a long-lasting detrimental impact of the pandemic on health outcomes. So we've been keen throughout this challenging 18 months to feed back data in real time to our community. So that's to scientists, clinicians, patients and the public. And we've done so through our current data pages, which you can see here a snapshot from our So Protect website and the So Protect Me website. And we've also summarised our findings as infographics, which we've been able to share through social media and through all of our partner patient organisations. And I'd just like to end by really thanking and acknowledging the huge team effort that's gone into both the So Protect and So Protect Me. It's been an absolute pleasure to work with everybody really listed here, and great to have such international engagement. I'd like to acknowledge the other members of the executive committee, so Catherine Smith, Jonathan Barker and Chris Griffiths, and of course a huge thank you to all of our partner professional organisations, including the IPC and partner patient organisations, who have really helped to encourage participation and also to disseminate the findings. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Dr. Mahil, for that great talk. We have any questions, please put them in the question and answer chat box. But I have one. Are you looking at the vaccinations, or are you doing a registry around that?
Yeah, so it's obviously a really important question, and it's the next question that follows on quite nicely from the data. So separate to So Protect, actually, we at St John's have been leading research into immunogenicity of the vaccines in the context of immunosuppression, and we released the first dose data it's published in the Lancet Rheumatology, and we're just looking at the second dose data at the moment. And it's interesting, so the first dose data showed that actually the cellular immunogenicity, and we looked at Th1 and T follicular helper cell responses and IL-17 responses to that first dose, were comparable in the cohort of patients we had receiving biologics and those on methotrexate. But actually the functional humoral responses and serological responses seem to be lower in patients on methotrexate compared to biologics. And yeah, so the second dose data will be interesting.
That'll be very interesting to see that, see more of that data.
Yeah.
Do you think patients on systemics are going to be more likely to get the vaccine or not, or is that something that you're collecting also?
So it's been interesting. We've just had a look, because we updated the questionnaire earlier this year to ask about vaccination uptake, and actually from So Protect Me, it's been overwhelmingly very positive in that patients who are on immunosuppressants are sort of getting them. They're having they're keen to have the vaccine. Very few have said that they're not. So I think that's testament probably to the communication going on through the clinicians, through the hospitals, really encouraging patients to take it up. But it's been overwhelmingly very positive, actually.
That's great. Well, thank you again for your talk.